in a previous interview, you mentioned that there's an interesting dynamic with mogul skiing or qualifying for the Olympics, where I think there's a fixed number of spots and that can be split across many different forms of skiing. So it would not be necessary that if you're good at mogul skiing, moguls just the top 4 might go. You might be competing with people from other sports as well.
Mm-hmm.
How do you view this dynamic? I find this to be slightly jarring to think of, because typically you qualify for the sport that you compete in. If you're good, you end up making it. But in this case, a lot of it might depend on luck as well, and you're also watching other different sports and how they perform. How do you come to terms with this? How do you deal with this? And what is your view of this particular system that exists?
It's pretty interesting. I would say it doesn't tend to affect our current women's team as much as it does our men's team, just because so essentially it's just, I believe it's 36 spots across probably 6 different disciplines, I would say. That's probably about right. And so each gender can get, of one sport or one discipline, can get up to 4 people who can go to the Olympics. And if your team is quite good, then you'll likely fill all 4 spots. But if you are more, I would say, in the mix of probably top 10, top 20 for your sport, then it's you are more in the running relative to other sports as well. And so I think it's definitely a really interesting process on so many levels, and just qualifying within your team based on, my teammates are people who during the winters I spend the hands down the most time with, but they're also my number one competitors for those spots, which is definitely an interesting dynamic to navigate, and then something that people don't necessarily realize as well. So it's not the top 30 in the world in your sport that go. It's just within each nation. And then some nations decide not to bring as many people because they'd like to allocate it to other sports which have more medal potential. So for example, like this past Olympics, like Canada didn't fill all of their spots for mogul skiing, even though they have decent skiers. And so it's just a kind of an interesting dynamic all around to see how all of that plays out. And at the end of the day, though, you just focus on your process and how to best execute what you're there to do.
Very interesting dynamic.
Yeah,
it was a slightly confusing one for me, because
it is confusing.
Typically you would just qualify for the sport if you're good enough for it. So, but yeah, interesting that you shared that.